My name is Zeloth, and I have spent the last 340 cycles pushing documents across desks at the Galactic Governance Assembly. Yes, 340 cycles. That is roughly 680 of your Earth years, give or take a few solar rotations. And let me tell you something about those 680 years. They were spectacularly, magnificently, soul-crushingly boring. You see, the Galactic Governance Assembly, or the GGA as we call it when we are feeling particularly uninspired, has maintained perfect peace across 47 star systems for over 800 cycles. Perfect peace. Do you know how we achieved this incredible feat? Paperwork, mountains of it, forms in triplicate, requisition orders that require 16 different signatures, trade dispute resolutions that take 40 cycles to process. We did not end war with weapons or diplomacy or inspiring speeches about unity. No. We ended war by making it so bureaucratically inconvenient that species just gave up trying. Want to invade your neighboring system? Fill out Form 7743B, submit it to the Military Actions Committee, wait for the Environmental Impact Assessment, get approval from the Cultural Preservation Board, and then maybe, in about 60 cycles, we will get back to you. By then you have forgotten why you were angry in the first place. It is brilliant, really. Suffocatingly, mind-numbingly brilliant. Every species in our glorious assembly has their designated role, you understand. The Krail are the muscle, all scales and teeth, and aggressive posturing. The Methodians handle technology because apparently having 12 fingers makes you naturally good at engineering. The Voshan manage food production across the agricultural worlds, and my people, the Krovan, well, we handle administration. We are the ones who make sure every form is properly stamped, every regulation is followed to the letter, every comma is in its designated place. For 800 cycles, this system has worked flawlessly. Not a single major conflict, not one species stepping out of line, just peaceful, organized, tremendously dull governance. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have suspected something was wrong when the humans applied for associate membership status. I should have paid more attention when their application was approved. I definitely should have questioned it when they sent their first diplomatic attaché to our headquarters. But I did not. Why would I? Humans were newcomers, barely worth noticing. They had only just discovered faster-than-light travel 20 cycles ago. They were primitives, really. What possible threat could they pose to our perfect system? That was my first mistake. My second mistake was meeting Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb arrived on a Tuesday. I remember this because Tuesdays are when we process the low-priority diplomatic credentials, and his arrival was considered so insignificant that they scheduled it between a recycling committee meeting and lunch. He stepped off the transport shuttle wearing what I later learned was called a suit. It was gray. It was rumpled. It looked like he had slept in it, possibly for several days. His tie, a thin strip of fabric that served no apparent functional purpose, hung slightly crooked. His hair, which was thinning at the top, was combed over in a way that fooled absolutely nobody. He carried a briefcase that was held together with what appeared to be adhesive tape. This was Earth's diplomatic attaché. This was the being they had chosen to represent their entire species at the Galactic Governance Assembly. I was underwhelmed. "Welcome to the GGA," I said, extending my foreclaw in what I had learned was a human greeting gesture. "I am Zeloth, and I will be your orientation coordinator." He shook my claw with a grip that was surprisingly firm for such an unremarkable-looking creature. "Marcus Webb," he said. "Pleased to meet you. Sorry about the appearance. The faster-than-light travel does not agree with my stomach, and I spent most of the trip in the lavatory." "Wonderful. Just wonderful." I ran through his file while walking him to his assigned office. Marcus Webb, age 54 Earth years, former insurance claims adjuster from a place called Ohio, 30 years of experience reviewing policy documents and processing claims. No military background, no political background, no scientific achievements, nothing that would remotely qualify him as a diplomat except apparently he was very, very good at reading contracts. The humans had sent us a paper pusher. How delightfully appropriate. So Webb said as we walked through the marble corridors of the assembly headquarters, "What exactly will I be doing here?" I pulled up his assignment on my data tablet. "You have been assigned to the Trade Dispute Resolution Department, subsection 7, level 3. You will be reviewing historical trade agreements and updating them to current standard format. It is very important work. It was not important work. It was the job we gave to people we wanted to keep busy and out of the way. Webb nodded slowly. Historical trade agreements. How historical are we talking? Some date back 600, 700 cycles. Most have not been reviewed since they were first filed, but regulations require periodic review, so here we are. And I will be reading through all of them? The actual documents? Well, yes, I said. That is the job. Webb smiled. It was a strange smile, the kind you give when you have just been told something that makes you inexplicably happy. Perfect, he said. I love reading the fine print. I should have recognized that smile. I should have understood what it meant when a human says they love reading fine print. In my defense, I had never met a human before. I had no context for understanding that some humans, particularly those from insurance companies in Ohio, view fine print the way Carol warriors view a battlefield, as a place where they can do damage. I left him in his office, surrounded by 600 cycles worth of unread documents, and walked away thinking, what could possibly go wrong? That was my third mistake. Webb had been in his office for exactly 23 days when he sent me a message requesting a meeting. The message was polite, formal, and included proper citation formatting. I was immediately suspicious. Nobody uses proper citation formatting unless they are about to ruin your day. I arrived at his office to find him surrounded by holographic displays, each one showing a different historical document. The man had not just read through 600 cycles of trade agreements. He had cross-referenced them. He had made charts. He had color-coded sections by date, species, and resource type. Zaloth, he said, looking up from his desk with that same unsettling smile. I found something interesting. Interesting is a word that should be banned from all bureaucratic settings. Nothing good ever follows interesting. He pulled up a document on the main display. It was the Treaty of Chandros succeeded 612 cycles ago between the founding members of the Assembly. I had seen it before, of course. Everyone had seen it. It was the foundational document of our entire governmental structure. Finex Section 47, Subsection 12, Paragraph 9, Webb said, highlighting the text. It says, and I quote, any species classified as emerging technological civilization upon achieving associate membership status shall be granted provisional authority over strategic resource allocation pending full integration review, said authority to be exercised through designated attaché until such time as permanent council representation is established. I stared at the text. I had read this treaty a dozen times. I had never noticed that clause. So, I said, though my stomach was already beginning to sink. So, Webb continued, his voice perfectly calm, humans are classified as an emerging technological civilization. We achieved associate membership status 23 days ago. We have not yet been granted full council representation, and I am the designated attaché. The sinking feeling in my stomach became a full plunge. That is a defunct clause, I said quickly. It has not been invoked in centuries. It is ceremonial, symbolic. It does not actually mean anything. Does it say that anywhere in the document? Webb asked. It did not. Does any subsequent treaty or amendment specifically revoke this clause? He continued. It did not. Then, according to the Assembly's own regulations, specifically the Legal Precedent Act of Cycle 427, which states that all treaty clauses remain in effect unless explicitly revoked or superseded, this clause is still active, which means, technically, I have authority over strategic resource allocation for the entire Assembly. I did what any reasonable administrator would do in this situation. I panicked, called an emergency committee meeting, and prayed that someone smarter than me could make this go away. The committee meeting was a disaster. High Chancellor Drethik, a pompous Voshan who had held his position for 200 cycles, actually laughed when Webb presented his findings. This is absurd, he declared, his three eyes blinking in amused disbelief. You are suggesting that you, a human, a species barely out of your own solar system, should have authority over resource allocation. Preposterous. Not suggesting, Webb said mildly, stating, according to your own laws. This is irrelevant human nonsense. Admiral Korthax growled. The Krell military commander's scales rippled with irritation. We do not have time for games. I agree, Webb said. which is why I have already filed the proper paperwork to formally invoke the clause, Form 8821C, submitted to the Legal Review Board this morning. You should receive notification within the hour. The room went silent. You cannot be serious, I whispered. Webb pulled a document from his briefcase. I am always serious about proper procedure. 3 hours later, the Assembly's legal team, after reviewing 600 cycles of treaty law and consuming what I can only assume were massive quantities of anxiety medication, confirmed what we all feared. Marcus Webb was technically correct. And in bureaucracy, technically correct is the most terrifying kind of correct. Webb started small, halt betrus. That was the terrifying part. He did not immediately restructure the entire government or make sweeping declarations of power. No. He did what any good bureaucrat does. He sent memos. Polite memos. Friendly memos. Memos that included phrases like per our discussion, and as per protocol and kindly advise. Memos that were technically orders backed by 600-cycle-old treaty law. His first memo went to the Fleet Command Authority. Dear Admiral Korthax, it read, I have reviewed current patrol route assignments and noticed several inefficiencies in resource allocation. Per my authority under Treaty of Chandros Sex, Section 47, Subsection 12, Paragraph 9, I am suggesting the following optimizations to improve coverage and reduce fuel expenditure. Suggesting, he used the word suggesting, but we all knew what it meant. The Fleet Command spent 3 days arguing that a human insurance adjuster had no business telling the Krell military where to position their warships. Then their legal department pointed out that refusing a direct order from someone with treaty-backed authority would be a violation of assembly law. The fleet routes were changed. Within a week, something remarkable happened. The Krell Third Fleet, which had been positioned at the Xantha border in what everyone knew was preparation for an invasion, was suddenly reassigned to patrol the Outer Rim sectors, not because of diplomatic pressure, not because of peace negotiations, because Webb had determined that their current position was inefficient. The invasion never happened. The Xantha Confederation did not even realize they had been saved. 2 weeks later, Webb turned his attention to trade agreements. He pulled up the Methodian Voshan agricultural contract, a document so old that most people had forgotten it existed, and started reading. Actually reading. Line by line, word by word. Xyloth, he called me into his office. Can you explain why the Methodians have been paying a 15% tariff on grain shipments for the last 300 cycles, when, according to this contract, the tariff was supposed to sunset after 50 cycles? I looked at the document. He was right. The tariff should have ended 250 cycles ago, but it had not, because nobody had read the contract, because the Voshan were making enormous profits from that tariff, because that was just how things were done. It is complicated, I said weakly. No, Webb replied. It is math. And the math says the Methodians have been overcharged by approximately 470 billion credits. He filed Form 6634A, Request for Trade Agreement Correction and Refund Authorization. The Voshan Economic Council tried to block it. They failed, because Webb had read the rules, all of them, and he knew exactly which forms to file, which committees had jurisdiction, and which procedural loopholes could be closed with properly formatted documentation. The Methodians got their refund. The Voshan were furious, and Webb moved on to the next contract. Then the next. Then the next. Within a month he had reorganized 40% of the Assembly's trade infrastructure using something he called actuarial tables and risk assessment matrices, tools from the insurance industry. Tools designed to find inefficiencies, eliminate fraud, and ensure fair distribution of resources. Admiral Korthax tried to launch a campaign against the Draxan territories. Webb denied his fuel requisition, citing supply chain scheduling conflicts. The campaign was postponed indefinitely, then cancelled, then forgotten. The Zelith Commonwealth and the Paxar Union had been engaged in a border dispute for 400 cycles. Webb found the original treaty that defined their borders. Turned out they were arguing over a mistranslation. The word north in ancient Zelith actually meant galactic north, not planetary north. They had been fighting over the wrong territory for 4 centuries. He sent them both a memo with the correction. The war ended on a Thursday. I watched all of this happen from my desk, surrounded by my own mountains of paperwork, and felt a growing sense of horror. Not because Webb was doing anything wrong, but because he was doing everything right. He was following every form, respecting every procedure, and in doing so he was systematically dismantling a power structure that had existed for 800 cycles. The mighty Krell Empire, conquerors of 14 star systems, could not invade anyone because their fuel efficiency reports were not properly filed. The Voshan Economic Council, which had controlled agricultural trade for centuries, was losing billions in revenue because their contracts were being corrected to actual legal standards. Species that had maintained power through carefully constructed loopholes were suddenly finding those loopholes closed with Form 9987B, Amendment to Existing Agreement with Retroactive Correction. Webb was not conquering the galaxy with weapons or technology or superior strategy. He was conquering it with spreadsheets, with properly formatted memos, with a comprehensive understanding of regulatory compliance. The old guard was collapsing, and they were collapsing under the weight of their own paperwork. And the most terrifying part, Webb was just getting started. The emergency session was called on cycle 847, day 73. Every major power in the assembly gathered in the Grand Council chamber, united for the first time in decades by a common enemy, not an invading fleet, not a cosmic threat. A middle-aged human in a rumpled suit. High Chancellor Drethek stood at the podium, all three eyes blazing with righteous fury. We are here today to address the chaos that has been inflicted upon this assembly by the human attaché Marcus Webb. His abuse of an archaic, irrelevant treaty clause has disrupted centuries of established order. I am calling for an immediate vote to revoke his authority and expel him from these proceedings. The chamber erupted in agreement. Our fists pounded on desks. Scales rattled. Tentacles waved approvingly. This was it. The moment where the natural order would be restored. Then Webb walked in. He carried 3 briefcases. 3.
Each one was stuffed so full of documents that they bulged at the seams.
He set them down on the defendant's table with 3 solid thumps that echoed through the chamber like a death knell. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I was informed this was an emergency session regarding my status. I have prepared my response." Drethke's center eye twitched. "This is not a debate, human. This is a vote." "Actually," Webb said, opening the first briefcase, "according to Assembly Rules of Order, Section 22, any member facing expulsion or loss of authority is entitled to a full hearing before any vote can be conducted. I invoke that right. I have also prepared 47 individual motions that must be addressed before we can proceed to voting." He pulled out a stack of documents and began distributing them to the council members. Each document was properly formatted, correctly cited, and absolutely legitimate. Admiral Korthax rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the chamber. "We do not have time for your games, human. The Krell do not hide behind paperwork." "Point of order," Webb said calmly. "The Admiral is speaking out of turn. According to parliamentary procedure, he must be recognized by the chair before addressing the assembly." Drethkik's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Fine. The chair recognizes Admiral Korthax." "Thank you," Korthax growled. "I move that we suspend all procedural rules and vote immediately." "I object," Webb said. Assembly Charter Article 7 explicitly states that procedural rules cannot be suspended during expulsion hearings. To do so would invalidate any vote taken. The legal team, seated in the corner, nodded reluctantly. He was right. Korthax sat down, defeated by a human who had never held a weapon in his life. For the next 6 hours we watched something extraordinary. Every attempt to remove Webb was countered with a properly filed motion. Every accusation was met with documented evidence and correct legal citations. Every procedural shortcut was blocked by someone who knew the rules better than the people who wrote them. The Voshan representative tried to argue that Webb's actions had caused economic harm. Webb presented actuarial tables showing that the Assembly's economy had actually improved by 12% since his corrections began. The Methodian delegate claimed Webb had exceeded his authority. Webb pulled out the Treaty of Chandros Fix, the Legal Precedent Act, and 14 subsequent rulings that explicitly supported his position. High Chancellor Drethek himself attempted to declare the entire proceeding invalid. Webb calmly cited Assembly Rule 891, which stated that the Chancellor could not unilaterally dismiss a legally convened hearing. Each attack failed. Not because Webb was stronger or smarter or more powerful, but because he had read the instruction manual, all 600 cycles of it, and he understood something that the rest of us had forgotten. Bureaucracy is not a shield, it is a weapon, and in the hands of someone who truly understands it, it is unstoppable. I sat in my seat, watching this unremarkable human dismantle the most powerful beings in the galaxy using nothing but properly formatted motions and correct parliamentary procedure, and I felt something I had not felt in 340 cycles of service. Admiration. The humans had not sent us a warrior. They had not sent us a diplomat. They had sent us something far more dangerous. They had sent us someone who had survived 30 years in corporate insurance. Someone who had spent 3 decades navigating bureaucratic systems designed to be impenetrable. Someone who had weaponized boredom itself. By the time the session ended, 12 hours after it began, not a single vote had been taken. Every motion to remove Webb had been tabled, deferred, or referred to committee for further review. Webb packed up his 3 briefcases, nodded politely to the exhausted council members, and walked out of the chamber. He had won without firing a shot, without raising his voice, without breaking a single rule. And we all knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. 3 weeks after the failed expulsion hearing, Webb submitted Proposal 10447B, Comprehensive Restructuring of Galactic Governance Assembly Administrative Framework. It was 847 pages long. I read all of it. Not because I wanted to, but because I had a sinking feeling that this document would define the rest of my unnaturally long life. I was correct. Webb's proposal was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its efficiency. He had identified 47 separate layers of administration that served no purpose except to justify their own existence. Committees that reported to committees that reported to oversight boards that reported to advisory panels that accomplished absolutely nothing except generating paperwork. He eliminated all of them. In their place, he proposed accountability systems borrowed directly from Earth's insurance industry, risk assessment protocols, performance metrics, quarterly reviews with actual consequences. Every department would have clearly defined objectives, measurable outcomes, and transparent budget allocation. The proposal passed, not because the council wanted it to pass, but because Webb had structured it in such a way that voting against it would require filing 600 separate objection forms, each one requiring committee review and legal assessment. Nobody had the energy to fight him anymore. The restructuring took 6 months. When it was finished, the Galactic Governance Assembly had been transformed from a bloated monument to inefficiency into something that actually functioned. And then the strangest thing happened. Peace broke out. Real peace. Not the sullen, resentful peace maintained by bureaucratic inconvenience, but actual cooperation between species. Why? Because going to war now required filling out 340 different forms, submitting environmental impact assessments, getting approval from 12 different departments, and providing detailed cost-benefit analysis that proved military action was more efficient than diplomatic solutions. Nobody could ever prove that, because it never was. The Krail, those legendary warriors who had conquered star systems through sheer military might, discovered that they could not launch a single offensive without Webb's office denying their resource allocation on efficiency grounds. After 3 months of trying, Admiral Cortex retired from military service and enrolled in the Assembly's newly created Project Management Certification Program. I wish I was joking. The Voshan Economic Council, stripped of their corrupt tariff schemes, had to actually compete in a fair market. Half of them failed. The other half thrived by adapting to the new transparency requirements. The Methodians, the Paxar, the Zealoth, even the notoriously isolationist Draxon, all fell in line. Not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was drowning in paperwork designed by someone who had spent 30 years processing insurance claims in Ohio. The galaxy was unified under the most terrifying force in the universe, not military might, not technological superiority, not even fear. Efficient bureaucracy. Species that had spent centuries fighting each other were now attending mandatory quarterly strategy meetings. Warriors were retraining as accountants. Trade disputes were being resolved through mediation rather than blockades because mediation required less documentation. I sat at my desk one evening processing the day's reports and realized something profound. We had built a system designed to maintain control through complexity. We had created a bureaucratic maze so intricate that nobody could navigate it, and we had convinced ourselves that this was strength. Then a human insurance adjuster showed up, read the instructions, and used our own system against us. We had defeated ourselves with our own red tape, and Marcus Webb had simply tied the final knot. 6 months after the restructuring, I was promoted, or demoted. I am still not entirely sure which. I now serve as Chief Operations Officer, reporting directly to Marcus Webb. My job is to ensure that his efficiency standards are maintained across all departments. I process 60% less paperwork than before and accomplish 3 times as much actual work. I hate that I do not hate it. The galaxy is thriving. Conflicts are at an all-time low. Trade is booming. The Assembly's approval rating, something we never even measured before, is at 78%. Species that have hated each other for millennia are now collaborating on infrastructure projects because Webb's resource allocation formulas incentivize cooperation. It is horrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Last Tuesday, Webb called me into his office. He was packing his briefcase, the same one held together with adhesive tape. "I am thinking about retiring," he said casually. "I miss my garden. I miss watching football on Sundays." I felt my blood freeze. You cannot retire. Who will run things? Who will maintain the systems? Who will stop the Krell from invading someone? Webb smiled that unsettling smile. "I have already trained my replacement. She arrives next Monday." "Who?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Janet Peterson. She spent 35 years in corporate accounting. She is very thorough." "Of course she is." Webb stood, shook my claw one final time, and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "You know what your problem was, Xyloth? You built a system that nobody understood, and you thought that made you powerful. But the real power has always belonged to the people who actually read the manual." He left. Janet arrived the following Monday with 4 briefcases and a tablet computer full of spreadsheets. The galaxy never stood a chance. I learned something important during those months working with Marcus Webb, something that I will carry with me for the rest of my unnaturally long life. Never ever underestimate someone who has survived corporate middle management. They have already been through hell. Your bureaucracy is just a warm-up.